Good day and welcome to this City Point podcast. I'm joined by Declan Hooper from Wickets and Pickets. My name's Phil Dillon. We're here to talk about the sad news that Australia's tour of South Africa has had to be cancelled. And Declan, I don't know about you, but I just feel a little bit let down by Cricket Australia's stance on this, and after what the Indians did to help Australian cricket. It's a bit of a cop-out, maybe. And doesn't seem to be that the South Africans are very happy about it either.
No, well, first of all, g'day again. I know, obviously, we're in quite a privileged position in Australia with COVID. However, the rest of the world aren't in the same position, but yet they still seem to be getting on with playing cricket and trying to put as many safety protocols in place as possible. Now, I understand players' safety is the most important thing when it comes to these type of things. But by the sounds of things, it does sound like Cricket South Africa have tried their best to ensure that the Australian cricket team and support staff are as safe as possible when touring South Africa. So to me, it does leave a bit of a poor taste in your mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'll just read you a bit from a story on the Cricket South Africa website. South Africa's CSA's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Shuab Mandra, said there was not much more than that CSA could have done to appease Cricket Australia and prepare more appropriately. He's quoted as saying the protocols we had proposed to CA were unprecedented. Firstly, we'd agreed that our own Proteas team would enter the biosecurity bubble 14 days prior to the arrival of the Australian team, which also meant that they would alter their plans during the current tour of Pakistan because they're there now. So it looks like South Africa have done everything they possibly can to help Australia, and it just seems to me that strange that they would have gone to the extremes of picking a squad like last week, put all those players through the agony of not being picked on that squad, and then a week later decide that they're not going. It just doesn't sit right with me at all for some reason. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we're biosecurity experts, but far from it. But like you say, that England have gone to India. India came to Australia. Of course, people would point to the fact that the South African tour, England tour to South Africa was cut short, and it was cancelled completely. Bit of a different scenario then anyway, because that was South Africa in real grips of the pandemic. Since the conditions that they're working under now and the fact that they've got this extra bubble, I think Australia were offered the chance to stay in a country lodge, just them and maybe the South Africans as well, for the whole time they're there, and they turned that down. And the Graham Smith, director of Cricket South Africa, seems to be, shall we say, a little bit pissed off.
Well, and not to mention, I think, obviously, everyone will go back to automatic the tour with England and the problems they had with COVID there. However, you've got to expect, and you've probably got to assume that the protocols would have been ramped up after that, because I think it probably left a lot of egg on Cricket South Africa's face that players did get COVID during that tour. And you'd have to assume, and you'd have to take the medical advisor there on his face value, that the protocol would have been ramped up. So to me, it doesn't make much sense. And as you said, to go to the effort of picking a squad, surely that they must have some intention of going. So I don't know where the deal breaker's gone along the lines, and I suppose we'll probably never know. But it does seem a bit odd that they've just kind of pulled out all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, I don't forget that how much planning would have gone in to this tour by South African officials in the first place. They would have had to do a lot of stuff to organise the Australians coming and arrange for them coming, and I can understand why they're a little bit peeved for it to be called off, especially after the Australians have gone to the effort of actually picking a squad. I mean, they had the chance. They had the chance to pull out before they named the squad, and that would have given the South Africans a little bit more time as well.
Well, this is it. I think this tour seems a bit of a win-win for both parties. I think South Africa get Australia out, which is obviously a big deal for them. But for Australia, I mean, you've got the Test Championship that would have been partly riding on this tour. You would have had the embarrassment or somewhat embarrassment of losing to India at home. That would have been made up for that. And it was the only scheduled tour as of yet that is before the Ashes. So for Australia to pull out, then one can only assume that there's some kind of deal breaker that has really, really hit a wall with Cricket Australia.
Yeah, and the thing is, I can't see anywhere that's come from anybody within Cricket Australia to say what that deal breaker is. South Africa recently hosted Sri Lanka in a biosecure environment, BSC, at Centurion. There was no breach of the protocol there. There was no cases of COVID there. The Pakistan women's team is touring South Africa right as we speak, and they're in a BSE in Durban. So if there was like a reason behind it, if there'd been like, you know, some cases come out of this Sri Lankan tour or this Pakistan women's tour, then I can understand that Australia saying, "Oh, don't fancy going there because it's not as secure." But don't forget, the West Indies went to England right in the middle of when COVID was at its peak, I would imagine, in England during the English summer, and they managed to work that out pretty well. And then the Indians come into Australia, and they managed to work that out pretty well. I mean, I also go back to a few weeks before the Brisbane Test, a lot of complaints by people in Australia saying that the Indians were getting upset because they didn't want to go to Brisbane, might not want to go to Brisbane because they might have to quarantine or whatever, and they were having a go at the Indians for being soft and stuff like that. So now the boot's on the other foot. I wonder how that's going to come out.
And I was reading today that Australia proposed to have the tour in Australia and also proposed to have it in a neutral venue. Now, I wonder whether this actually pulling out was a bit of a double bluff from Cricket Australia, that they did want to play in South Africa and tried to get it in Australia as another revenue maker for Australian cricket. We saw how well this Test series against India went with crowds in the stadium and whatnot. Cricket South Africa called the bluff, and it all kind of fell apart. But it does seem like there's some internal politics that have definitely come into play here.
Yeah, I just listen, like reading between the lines. I don't think actually reading between the lines of Graham Smith. I think he's like really pointed, and I think it would the same situation have happened if they were going to England.
Yeah,
you know, would they pull out last minute going to England? I don't think that would be the case, and I think because South Africa are not the bigger nations, well, although they're up there in the top 4 or 5, but if it had been England, I can't see them pulling out of an Ashes series, you know, in the same situation like 2 weeks before they're supposed to go. I just think it just doesn't sit well with me at all. You imagine how much money that South Africa authorities have put into this already, getting ready for the Australians to come. Before, you know, they wouldn't just like, okay, we're having a test match in Bloemfontein and so the Aussies will come, they've got to spend 2 weeks in a hotel, blah, blah, blah. They'd have to sort out all the security stuff, sort out special testing.
Booking in country lodges, everything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think it adds, I mean, whenever Australia do end up going to South Africa, I mean, we've had the sandpaper incident over there. Now we've got this. It does add a lot of spice to that rivalry, shall we say.
I wouldn't want to be an Australian going back there when their crowds come back.
Oh, I don't think so,
It's sort of like, I don't think it stands Cricket Australia in very good stead after doing something like that. Nobody's come out and said why what have you seen the actual, you know, a reason why they said that they're not happy with the bio bubble? Or
well, they basically just said, I just read the statement before, basically they just said that they couldn't there was guarantees on their safety. Now, I think they've travelled to England. As going back to your point, they travelled to England for a one-day tour, and I mean, England are probably coping just as poorly as South Africa with COVID currently, or even back then, and they still managed to get some T20s and ODIs played in that time. You've seen even some of the smaller nations. You've got the West Indies in Bangladesh currently. You've got South Africa and Pakistan currently. You've had England in Sri Lanka and now in India. Like this, for all we know currently, this might be life as we know it for at least the short term. I don't understand Cricket Australia's position, and I don't know where that puts them moving forward, because unless they're going to do a tour of New Zealand, they're running a COVID risk wherever they go. Don't know what precedent this sets moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do they want everybody to come to Australia and follow the protocols here? I mean, don't forget all these other guys, these other players and other countries are taking the risks as well. So it's not just them that's taking the risk.
Look, again, we don't know, and we're just speculating here. But it stands to reason that they've probably upped their protocol after the England tour, hence why there was no cases when the Sri Lankans came. Yeah. Now, moving forward, where does this leave Australia? We know scheduled test tours to the Ashes, essentially. It's a long wait between tests, if that's the case.
It's hardly what you would call an ideal preparation for coming up against England in Australia's summer in the end of this year. But also to the other point is that they also named the T20 squad, don't forget. And all those guys that could have been in that T20 squad to go to New Zealand, like Sir Mitchell Starc and David Warner, etc., are now not in that T20 squad. Do they? If those guys who are in New Zealand and they perform well, do they then get overridden by those guys when they pick the squad for the T20 World Cup?
I know the Test Championship is now kind of in notion, so the schedules have been put forward. But surely the way that scheduling's been restructured and cancelled and moved around, there's a chain of thought that would think that Australia should probably try and schedule some test matches in New Zealand around the same time as the T20. They can't use the COVID excuse there. They seem to be dealing with it as well as Australia is. And if you've got a team quarantining already in New Zealand on their way in, there's a chain of thought to think that they should schedule some tests as well, as I said.
Yeah, possibly. As cricket fans in Australia, we're now missing out on 3 test matches in South Africa, which would have been pretty exciting to watch. Yeah. With Rabada and Mgidi and Nigel, the new look South African attack taking on a pretty beaten up Australia. They spent all that time thinking about it and then made a test squad and then decided, 6 days after that test squad was named, we're not going after all. It just seems just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. And the fact that those poor blokes who've been left off the tour and said, mate, you're not wanted anymore.
And the other way as well, you likes of Steckity and Alex Carey, who were put in the team, either Alex Carey getting another chance at putting in the bag of green, or Steckity getting his bag of green. It's a real kick in the pants for them as well. I think it does no one any favours, this decision.
Well, the other thing as well, those two, Carey and Steckity, after their form in the Big Bash, should have been on that T20 squad. Exactly. So they've also missed out on that. They've missed out on the Test one, which would have been their chance to prove what they could do, and they've also missed on the chance to prove their to put their case across for the T20 World Cup, and now they're not going to get that chance. So if somebody like Josh Philippe, for example, stands out well on that New Zealand tour, then Alex Carey shouldn't really get a look in the T20 squad for the World Cup because he wasn't chosen there. But the likelihood is he might do because he's got runners on the board, so to speak.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the days and weeks. And all we can hope for is that at some point Australia will inevitably go to South Africa and fulfill their duties to play South Africa. But I suppose time will tell on that. Thanks for having a chat with me, Phil. Make sure you like and subscribe this video and let us know your opinion in the comments. Thanks for now. We'll see you again soon.